this is Michael Gale again. This short video is called The Horror of Babylon is Not Jerusalem. In the first video on this series, we talked about how the horror of Babylon can't be the Catholic Church. A lot of teachers say it's the Catholic Church, and we covered that in the first video. And in this second part, we'll talk about how the horror of Babylon, or the harlot of Babylon, cannot be Jerusalem. So many prophecy teachers today are saying that the harlot is Jerusalem. And there's, as far as I can tell, there's three main reasons for this. And so the first reason some teachers call Jerusalem the harlot is because of her history. Through the Old Testament, she became a harlot. She's called a harlot by the prophets and by God. And so Jerusalem turned away from God. She rebelled against God. She fell into sin. And the Lord turned away from Jerusalem when she turned away from him. And Jerusalem actually jumped into bed with the harlot of Babylon, because all idolatry and all sexual immorality, all that stuff originated with the harlot of Babylon at the Tower of Babel with Nimrod. And so when Israel fell away and sinned, they were in bed with the harlot of Babylon. And so she fell into all this sexual immorality and all this idolatry worship, and the prophets warned Jerusalem, you can't be doing this stuff over and over. They warned Jerusalem, and Jerusalem rebelled over and over, and just eventually God had to discipline Jerusalem. She fell so far into sin that she actually began to burn her babies, burn them alive to Moloch, the baby killing demon. And that's when God said, okay, that's it. You're done. When you start killing your babies, it's over. You're going to go into Babylon, into captivity. And a lot of you are going to get killed, and a whole bunch more are going to be carried off into Babylon because of your sin. And of course, today we call Moloch the baby killing god. We call that Planned Parenthood today. So the Lord punished Israel for her sins. We know this. We know the history of Israel. We know the history of Jerusalem. But what the teachers who say Jerusalem is the harlot of Babylon conveniently forget is that the Lord restores Jerusalem. He restores Jerusalem. And so let's look at a couple verses on that, like Joel 3. For behold, in those days and at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them on behalf of my people and my inheritance, Israel, whom they've scattered among the nations. And then there's a whole bunch of prophetic verses about this. We're just going to hit a couple of them. Zechariah 2:10, sing for joy and be glad, O daughter of Zion, for behold, I am coming, and I will dwell in your midst, declares the Lord. Many nations will join themselves to the Lord in that day and become my people. Then I will dwell in your midst, and you will know that the Lord of hosts has sent me to you. The Lord will possess Judah as his portion in the Holy Land, and will again choose Jerusalem. Okay, Zechariah 12:8. In that day the Lord will defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And the one who is feeble among them in that day will be like David, and the house of David will be like God, like the angel of the Lord before them. And in that day I will set about to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. And I will pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. And they will look on me whom they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only son. And they will weep bitterly over him like the bitter weeping over a firstborn. And so the Lord pours out a spirit of grace and supplication on Jerusalem, and they accept Jesus as the Messiah. Zechariah 14, this is where the Lord returns to Jerusalem. And in that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which is in front of Jerusalem on the east. That's after the spirit of grace and supplication is poured out on Jerusalem. Jesus touches down on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem. I've been there many times. And so now compare this. Remember, the subject we're talking about here is people calling Jerusalem the harlot of Babylon. Okay, so the Lord restores Jerusalem and again chooses Jerusalem at the end of the age. and when Jerusalem repents and declares Jesus as the Messiah. This is all very straightforward. He descends to the Mount of Olives just outside the city. He destroys the enemies that surround Jerusalem and establishes the kingdom. Jesus rules the planet from Jerusalem for the next 1,000 years. The wedding supper, the marriage supper of the Lamb, the wedding, the 1,000-year kingdom. Okay, now compare that to the harlot of Babylon. At the end of the age, the harlot of Babylon is burned with fire and cast into the sea and no longer heard of or found any longer, ever. She's gone. She's toast. She's history forever. And so Revelation 18:21. Then a strong angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, so will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence and will not be found any longer. Now, so if the harlot of Babylon is Jerusalem, then Jerusalem is burned with fire, never to be seen or heard of again at the end of the age. So how many pages do we got to tear out of our Bible to make that work? For crying out loud. This is ridiculous for anybody to say that Jerusalem is the harlot of Babylon. Read your Bible. Jerusalem was corrupted by the harlot. Jerusalem committed adultery with the harlot of Babylon. But that did not make her the harlot of Babylon. The harlot of Babylon has been corrupting peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues since the rebellion at the Tower of Babel. Who hasn't been corrupted by her? So why is this so important? So let's look at Revelation 18:4. I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins and receive of her plagues. Remember, all those things happened to Israel and Jerusalem as examples for us. We are supposed to learn from them so we don't make the same mistakes. Has the church learned from Jerusalem's mistakes? Well, some have and some haven't. A large portion of the last day church is in bed with the harlot of Babylon today. But that doesn't make the church the harlot of Babylon. No, it didn't make Jerusalem the harlot of Babylon. It just means the church will be disciplined just like Jerusalem was disciplined. In the last days, those who are in the church, who are in bed with the harlot, will be disciplined. Remember, when this happened to Jerusalem, God punished Jerusalem, hauled them off into captivity. And when the church is in bed with the harlot, the church gets disciplined, just like Jerusalem did. And so what is this? This is the Great Tribulation. The purpose of the tribulation is to discipline the church to get the harlot out of the church, or to get the church out of the harlot. Okay, come out of her, my people. And so this is, of course, is Laodicea, the last day church that's apostate. And she's disciplined and reproved, as it says in Rev there. She's disciplined and reproved during the tribulation so that she will come out of the harlot. This is why this is so important to understand. The corruption that the harlot did to Jerusalem is the same thing, the same corruption that's happening today in the church. The devil never comes up with anything new. It's the same harlot of Babylon. It's the same junk, okay? So come out of her, my people. That's talking to the church. Revelation was written to the church, for the church. When it says my people, he's talking about Christians. The second reason many Bible teachers say Jerusalem is the harlot is because of Revelation chapter 11, right? We all know this verse. Because the bodies of the two witnesses lay in the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom, Egypt, and where also their Lord was crucified. Okay, these are three nicknames or allegories in Revelation chapter 11. It says the great city, which is the harlot of Babylon. And so this is talking about Sodom, which is the lust of the flesh, Egypt, the lust of the eyes, and where their Lord was crucified, the pride of life. And so these three things are the same three things that deceived Eve in the garden, and it worked pretty good there, and it's still working pretty good today. And it's the three things the devil's always had out there to offer everyone, and it's what the harlot has out there to offer everyone today. And so this isn't the literal Sodom. And the great city is not the literal Sodom. Sodom's gone, man. And this is not the literal Egypt. And this is not the literal Jerusalem, okay? It's not the literal Jerusalem. he wasn't even crucified in Jerusalem. He was crucified outside the camp, but that's another story. Okay, so the harlot is the final manifestation of what the Bible calls Sodom. And remember, these are the three allegories of the great city, the harlot. The LGBT world is dominating the planet today. If, we don't have to talk about that. You're slammed with it every time you turn on the TV or read a newsletter, right? LGBT, that's Sodom, and all sexual immorality that was going on. And she has made and the verse in Revelation says, she has made all the nations drunk on the wine of her sexual immorality. Look around. The nations are drunk on the wine of her sexual immorality today. Okay, and then the harlot is the final manifestation of what the Bible calls Egypt. She offers luxurious and sensuous living to anyone who will get in bed with her. Okay, now for the third one, the third allegory, where their Lord was crucified. This is talking about martyrdom, Christian martyrdom. It's not the literal Jerusalem. It is a reference to all those who have been slain for their faith throughout church history. She has the blood of prophets and saints on her hands. This is drinking the cup. Jesus asked the disciples, can you drink this cup? And the cup is martyrdom. The harlot is the final manifestation of pride. She is rebellion, and she attempts to stop the plan of God by killing the prophets and killing the saints. She has the blood of prophets and saints on her hands. And so those are the three allegories. It's not the literal Sodom, not the literal Egypt, not the literal Jerusalem, okay? So, the third reason many Bible teachers say that Jerusalem is the harlot is just good old-fashioned Jew hatred. Jew hatred and hatred of Zion is once again exploding in the last days. The church has a dismal record when it comes to Jew hatred. Church history is full of pogroms, expulsions, persecutions, and holocausts against the Jew. Many churches today actually participate in the boycott, divestment, and sanction program, the BDS movement, against Israel. Persecuting Israel, nothing new, and so don't participate. There are a lot of mainline churches today that are participating in that and choosing the Palestinian state over the biblical heartland of Israel that God gave the Jews. Don't get caught up in any of that. It will not go well for you. And that's another reason why Bible teachers call Jerusalem the harlot, is because it makes them feel good about themselves. And it's just the Jews. It's always the Jews, right? Christ killers, kill the Jews, sick church history on this stuff. Okay, these are the three main reasons Bible teachers say the harlot is Jerusalem. In the big picture of things in the Bible, there are only two cities. You have the holy city and the great city. One belongs to God, and he will rule the planet from the holy city for the next 1,000 years. The other belongs to Satan. It's his city, the great city. It will fill the earth during the last days, and it will be burned with fire and never heard of again. Come out of her, my people. In the next video, we'll talk about some of the different characteristics of the harlot and how she is deceiving the world and the church. And don't forget my blog and my two books, The Two Witnesses and The Harlot of Babylon, on Amazon. And I'll see you in the next video. Come out of her, my people. Shalom.